On the 8th of May, 2005, a group of walkers in Limefield Woods came across what appeared to be a discarded bundle at the edge of a clearing. The authorities were quickly summoned, and the scene was cordoned off. Investigators would later describe the initial discovery as shocking not only for the family, but for the officers themselves. Emma's body was naked, suggesting a deliberate attempt to humiliate or erase identity, and a ligature was found around her neck, consistent with strangulation. The circumstances left little doubt. Emma Caldwell had been murdered. Emma Caldwell was born in 1977 in Erskine, a small suburb of Glasgow, Scotland. She was the daughter of Margaret and William Caldwell, who described her as intelligent, curious, and emotionally sensitive. Her father, Jonathan Caldwell, worked as a mid-level manager for a regional insurance company, a man who prided himself on his meticulous attention to spreadsheets, accounts, and decorum. Her mother, Mary Ann Caldwell, stayed at home for much of Emma's early childhood. Emma was the eldest of 3 siblings. Her family was close-knit and supportive, prioritizing the upbringing and education of their children despite the everyday challenges of life at the time. Emma's parents aimed to provide a safe and nurturing environment, encouraging her interest in learning, reading, and engaging with others. Emma attended her local school, where she demonstrated abilities in languages and the humanities. Teachers noted her diligence, responsibility, and friendly nature. She easily connected with her peers and earned respect due to her honesty and attentive nature. During her school years, Emma showed interest in art and literature, enjoyed reading, discussing current events, and assisting classmates with their studies. At the same time, she was shy and sensitive, often feeling deeply about failures or conflicts, yet she consistently maintained a sense of fairness and a desire to help others. Friends remember Emma as a person with a gentle character and strong empathy. She had a talent for noticing small details and supporting people during difficult moments, often serving as a quiet advisor for those in need. Her sense of humor was subtle and intelligent. She could make friends laugh with a lighthearted joke, without ever using humor to hurt anyone. Emma was a loyal and reliable friend, always ready to help, even if it required personal effort or time. Her character was marked by a combination of inner strength and vulnerability. On one hand, she was capable of independence, making decisions, and standing up for her beliefs. On the other hand, she remained sensitive to the opinions of others and valued the support of those close to her. She appreciated honesty and openness in relationships, preferred to avoid conflict, and sought peaceful resolutions when possible. This balance of gentleness and inner resolve made her personality complex and compelling, inspiring trust and affection from those who knew her. During her youth, Emma was active in school activities and social circles. She enjoyed walks in nature, music, and deep conversations about life, always showing genuine interest in the people around her. Even during challenging periods, she retained the ability to find joy in simple things, whether it was spending time with friends, reading a book, or enjoying family moments. Her parents and friends noted that she consistently sought harmony, valuing trust, honesty, and mutual support. Emma Caldwell was, at heart, a deeply human individual, intelligent, attentive, and caring. The teenage years, however, brought their own challenges. Emma, like many adolescents, grappled with the search for identity, for meaning, and for independence. Yet, for her, these questions were often intensified by a sense of heightened responsibility toward her family. Her younger siblings looked to her as a role model, and Emma took this responsibility seriously, often prioritizing their needs over her own. This sense of duty was compounded by her observations of her parents' anxieties and occasional conflicts. Emma became a keen reader of emotions, learning to navigate tensions with tact and diplomacy, a skill that would later become essential in both her personal and professional life. In parallel with her emotional and intellectual development, Emma cultivated an array of interests and skills that suggested a future marked by versatility and ambition. University life provided Emma with a sense of autonomy and freedom, yet she approached it with the same measured diligence that had characterized her adolescence. She excelled academically, balancing demanding coursework with extracurricular activities such as volunteer programs, mentoring initiatives, and research projects. Professors and classmates alike noted her combination of intelligence, curiosity, and disciplined work ethic, qualities that distinguished her as someone likely to achieve significant professional success. Yet even as Emma appeared to thrive, there were subtle signs that she was quietly grappling with deeper issues. She was not unhappy in the conventional sense, but her early maturity and self-awareness often set her apart from peers, creating an inner world rich with reflection but occasionally tinged with anxiety. Upon graduation, Emma moved into the professional world, securing positions that allowed her to apply her analytical and interpersonal skills. She gravitated toward roles in corporate strategy and organizational analysis, environments where intelligence, discretion, and the ability to read people were highly valued. Colleagues admired her professionalism and dedication, but Emma maintained her characteristic distance, ensuring that while she was respected, she remained difficult to categorize entirely. Outside of work, she continued her intellectual pursuits, attended lectures, and cultivated a network of friends who shared her interests in psychology, literature, and cultural affairs. However, the tragic loss of the older sister from cancer in 1998 brought Emma to deep depression, and she began to battle addiction, first to alcohol and later to forbidden substances. Her descent into dependency was gradual but devastating. Like many who fell into addiction in Glasgow during that period, she found herself caught between cycles of temporary recovery and relapse, with limited access to consistent support. As her addiction deepened, Emma drifted away from the life she had once known. She lost jobs and strained family relationships, though her parents, Margaret and William Caldwell, never stopped trying to reach her. They visited her often, encouraged her to seek treatment, and remained hopeful that she would find her way back. Her mother in particular maintained regular contact, describing Emma as a loving girl who had simply lost her way. By her mid-20s, Emma was living a transient life in Glasgow's city centre, where she became love for money to support her addiction. Like many women in similar circumstances, she operated mainly in the city's red light districts, often late at night. Friends from that period recalled that she was wary but polite, quiet but dependable. She wasn't confrontational. She just wanted to earn enough for the next day, the next dose, the next bit of stability that always felt out of reach. Social workers and outreach volunteers who met her during this time described her as gentle and trusting, with a sense of humor that surfaced even on difficult nights. She sometimes spoke about wanting to get clean, about wanting to return to her family and live a normal life again. There were attempts at rehabilitation, moments of progress, and genuine efforts to change. But like so many others battling long-term addiction, Emma's circumstances, poverty, dependency, trauma, and limited resources, made recovery painfully fragile. The women who worked the streets formed their own quiet networks of care and protection, often sharing information about dangerous clients or police patrols. It was a world that existed at the edge of public awareness, visible but rarely seen with empathy. Emma lived within that world, adapting as best she could. Despite the chaos surrounding her, Emma remained close to her family. She often visited her parents in Erskine, sometimes staying a few days to recover from the physical toll of her addiction. Her mother recalled her as a girl who never stopped being loving, even when she was at her lowest. Those visits offered glimpses of the person Emma once was, affectionate, funny, and reflective. Her family hoped that one day she would return home for good. In early 2005, Emma was 27 years old. She was trying to manage her addiction and had recently left a rehabilitation program. Though her future was uncertain, there were still moments of hope. She kept in touch with support workers, made tentative plans to stabilize her life, and spoke about wanting a fresh start. But that year would instead become the last chapter of her life. April 4th began like many other days. Emma had been in touch with her mother earlier that week. She spoke warmly but briefly, reassuring her that things were okay. It was the kind of conversation that families often have when there's more beneath the surface, when love is mixed with worry and trust has been tested by time. Emma's mother hung up believing that her daughter was safe, unaware that it would be one of the last times she would ever hear her voice. Emma was last seen in early April, reportedly leaving her temporary accommodation in Glasgow for what friends and family assumed would be a night of work on the city's streets. She appeared calm and composed, dressed modestly and carrying a small handbag. A few people recognized her. She wasn't in distress, and nothing seemed unusual. Around 11 p.m., a witness remembered seeing her speaking with a man near a parked car, a detail that would only become significant much later. That night passed, and by morning, Emma was nowhere to be found. At first, no alarm was raised. It wasn't unusual for her to go silent for a day or two. Friends assumed she might be staying with someone or simply taking time alone. But when days turned into a week, concern deepened. Her mother tried to call but received no answer. Emma's family contacted the police and reported her missing. Initially, her disappearance was categorized as high risk due to her involvement in sex work and history of substance dependency. But the reality of the situation would prove far grimmer than anyone imagined. For the officers handling it, there was little immediate indication of foul play. Adults went missing often in a big city, some by choice, others because of circumstances beyond their control. But Margaret Caldwell, Emma's mother, knew instinctively that something was wrong. Her daughter, despite her struggles, was always in touch. She called home regularly, sometimes just to say hello. Silence was not normal. As the days turned into weeks, the search widened. Police spoke with Emma's friends, her partner, and others in the Govan Hill area. Posters with her photograph began to appear on lampposts and community boards. Her face, soft features, light brown hair, and kind eyes looked out from the paper with an expression that seemed to ask for help. Local media began covering the story, highlighting the family's growing fear and their appeals for information. It would be more than a month before there was a breakthrough. On the 8th of May 2005, a group of walkers in Limefield Woods came across what appeared to be a discarded bundle at the edge of a clearing. The authorities were quickly summoned, and the scene was cordoned off. Investigators would later describe the initial discovery as shocking not only for the family but for the officers themselves. Emma's body was naked, suggesting a deliberate attempt to humiliate or erase identity, and a ligature was found around her neck, consistent with strangulation. The circumstances left little doubt. Emma Caldwell had been murdered. The discovery raised immediate questions. How had she come to be in such a secluded location? Who had access to her during her final hours? And why had there been such a delay in tracing her movements? For the family, there was an incomprehensible grief layered with uncertainty. Her mother recalled the moment she was informed. It felt unreal. We had hoped she was alive, that she had simply disappeared somewhere to escape her struggles. But hearing it confirmed, it was the worst possible news. For the local community and law enforcement, it marked the beginning of a complex investigation into both a brutal crime and a system that had allowed her to remain vulnerable. From the earliest moments, investigators faced practical challenges. The location of the body, a forested, relatively isolated area, suggested premeditation. Emma's movements in the days leading up to her death were partially documented through the limited network of social workers, acquaintances, and other sex workers who knew her routines. Evidence collected at temporary accommodations in Glasgow, combined with witness accounts, helped establish a timeline that narrowed the window of her disappearance. Yet even with these leads, the case remained opaque. From the beginning, detectives faced a challenge. The area where Emma had been found, Limefield Woods, near the town of Biggar in South Lanarkshire, was remote and difficult to access. The crime scene itself was meticulously processed. Forensic teams documented the placement of the body, collected trace evidence, and conducted a thorough search for any signs that could indicate a struggle or a perpetrator's identity. It quickly became evident that the murder had been committed by someone with knowledge of the area and an understanding of how to avoid immediate detection. Investigators quickly established that she had not reached the site on her own. Someone had taken her there. The surrounding landscape was quiet and rural, far from the busy streets of Glasgow where she was last seen. For detectives, That detail alone suggested planning and purpose. Investigators later reflected on how this combination of environmental familiarity and premeditation complicated the investigation from the start. The woods, often used by walkers and locals, became a critical site of inquiry, and officers mapped every access point and possible route to understand how Emma had arrived there. As the news broke, the public reacted with shock and sorrow. Emma Caldwell's name quickly became synonymous with a growing awareness of the dangers faced by vulnerable women in urban areas. Local newspapers covered the story extensively but respectfully, focusing on Emma's life and the desperate efforts of her family rather than sensational details. Community members in Govan Hill organized vigils, lighting candles in her memory and calling for justice. The investigation, led by Strathclyde Police, began methodically. Officers mapped Emma's final known movements, interviewing witnesses in the city center and those who lived near the woodland area. Forensic teams examined the site, collecting soil samples, fibers, and trace materials. A long list of potential suspects was compiled, most of them men known to frequent the same neighborhoods where Emma had lived and worked. It was an enormous undertaking, but from the very beginning, a single theory began to dominate the inquiry. The police investigation initially centered on a group of men who frequented the same areas as Emma. That connection, though tenuous, became the central thread of the investigation. Detectives traced phone records, vehicle movements, and witness accounts, all in an effort to build a case. The problem was that the evidence didn't quite fit. The timeline was uncertain, the phone data inconclusive. There were inconsistencies in witness statements, some based on vague recollections made under stress. But rather than broadening the scope of inquiry, investigators narrowed their focus, convinced they were on the right path. It was what some later described as a case of tunnel vision, a determination to make the facts fit the theory rather than the other way around. Several individuals were questioned, and 4 men of Turkish descent were eventually detained for interrogation. Authorities believed they had found a connection, a series of phone calls and movements that placed these men near Emma's last known location. But the case against them soon began to unravel. The evidence was circumstantial, the witness statements inconsistent. Despite weeks of questioning, no conclusive link could be established. Eventually, the Crown Office determined there was insufficient evidence to proceed. The men were released without charge. That decision would later prove to be one of the most consequential missteps in modern Scottish policing. By focusing narrowly on a single theory, investigators had overlooked other possibilities. They had missed a name that, at the time, appeared in their own notes, someone who had been mentioned by several women during earlier interviews. His name was Ian Packer. Ian Packer, a delivery driver in his early 40s with a known history of troubling behavior toward women. Several sex workers in the area had described encounters with a man matching his description, often mentioning that he drove a silver car and had a habit of offering them rides. Some had filed complaints, describing him as intimidating and persistent. In one report, a woman even mentioned that he claimed to know Emma Caldwell, but that information never gained traction. Investigators, focused on their primary suspects, dismissed it as irrelevant. Packer remained a background figure, someone noted but not pursued. The official investigation slowed. Detectives reviewed files periodically, but without new evidence, little could be done. For years, the case remained open but inactive. Media coverage dwindled, and the story slipped from the headlines. Yet Margaret and William Caldwell refused to give up. They continued to meet with police, to write letters, and to ask for updates. Their determination kept Emma's name alive in the public conversation, even when official efforts had stalled. Behind the scenes, there were growing concerns about how the case had been handled. Some officers within Strathclyde Police quietly questioned the direction of the inquiry. The emphasis on the initial suspects had consumed enormous resources while overlooking other credible leads. In time, these concerns would become central to one of Scotland's most significant policing scandals. Police also considered the social context of her death. Emma was one of many women operating in the city's sex trade, a community that historically had been underrepresented and overlooked in police investigations. Early in the inquiry, authorities recognized that many of the women who might have had relevant information were themselves reluctant to come forward due to fear of reprisals or legal consequences. This reticence would delay the gathering of crucial testimony and contribute to a slow initial investigation. Nevertheless, officers worked to establish contact with witnesses, using outreach programs, local charities, and social services to build a clearer picture of Emma's last days. The discovery of Emma's body also drew media attention, though initial reports were cautious in tone. National outlets reported her disappearance and subsequent death, highlighting her age, the location of the discovery, and her involvement in the sex trade. Local newspapers emphasized the tragedy of her loss and the need for law enforcement to act swiftly. Amid this coverage, there emerged a wider conversation about the risks faced by vulnerable women in Glasgow. A discussion that would continue for nearly 2 decades, as subsequent developments in the case revealed systemic failures and prolonged the path to justice. For the family, each development was both painful and incompletely informative. They attended briefings with police who explained procedural steps and watched as forensic teams continued to analyze the scene. The emotional toll was immense. The public documentation of her death, the reminders of her absence, and the painstakingly slow accumulation of evidence all compounded their grief. Those close to Emma recall the tension between hope and despair in those weeks. The hope that perhaps something had been missed, the despair at each new indication that she had been murdered. At the same time, investigators were working behind the scenes to establish suspects. Patterns of movement, past reports of harassment, and previous complaints lodged with social services formed an initial investigative framework. While the murder itself had the hallmarks of a deliberate, targeted act, it also intersected with broader challenges in policing marginalized communities. Many officers involved later acknowledged the difficulty of navigating these parallel issues. On one hand, pursuing leads rigorously. On the other, engaging with a community historically wary of law enforcement. By the end of May 2005, weeks after the discovery, the case had gained the attention of senior investigative teams. The murder was classified as high priority, with dedicated detectives assigned to follow up on all potential leads. The investigation changed hands multiple times as officers retired, transferred, or were reassigned. Each new team revisited the same files, often reaching the same dead ends. But the story never completely disappeared from the public consciousness. Every so often, new leads surfaced, most of them false, some promising, all eventually inconclusive. A decade passed. Technology advanced, forensics evolved, and social attitudes toward crimes against women began to shift. By 2015, renewed public interest in the case was sparked by investigative journalists who began looking into the unsolved murder. BBC Scotland, among others, published reports questioning why police had failed to pursue other suspects, particularly one individual. Again, the name that had appeared in early files, Ian Packer. The revelations reignited public outrage. Victim advocacy groups demanded a new investigation, and the Scottish Parliament received petitions calling for accountability. Under mounting pressure, Police Scotland, by then a unified national force, announced a full review of the case. A new team of detectives was assigned, independent from those who had led the original inquiry. Their mission: re-examine every piece of evidence from the ground up. What they found was deeply troubling. The early investigation had not only overlooked key witnesses, but it also failed to connect multiple reports from women who described threatening behavior by the same man. Several of these incidents occurred both before and after Emma's death, suggesting an ongoing pattern. The new team tracked down those witnesses, some of whom had never been properly interviewed. Their stories painted a chillingly consistent portrait. A man who cruised through Glasgow at night, targeting vulnerable women, offering them rides and driving them to remote locations. The more investigators learned, the clearer the picture became. Many of the women identified Packer's car and described specific details that matched his behavior patterns. Some had even provided vehicle registration numbers to police years earlier. In at least one instance, an officer had documented the information in a report, but the file had been marked no further action. In 2019, with support from forensic experts, the new investigative team revisited the physical evidence collected in 2005. Advances in technology allowed them to re-examine items that had previously yielded no results. It's possible that Emma, trusting that she knew him, accepted a ride. She may have believed it was just another encounter, one that would end like countless others, with her returning safely home. But that night, something went terribly wrong. What exactly transpired remains partly unknown, shaped by evidence and inference rather than eyewitness testimony. What is known is that Emma Caldwell never made it back to Glasgow. Instead, her life ended far from the city, in the quiet seclusion of Limefield Woods. They found trace material that could now be analyzed with modern DNA methods. It wasn't a single breakthrough, but a series of small confirmations, pieces of a puzzle that began to fit together after years of being overlooked. Gradually, a timeline of Packer's activities emerged. He had lived and worked in the Glasgow area for years, driving routes that frequently took him through neighborhoods known for prostitution. Multiple women came forward describing encounters that mirrored the pattern seen in Emma's case. Some of them had reported assaults and threats, but their claims had not been fully investigated at the time. When police reviewed these old statements alongside the new forensic findings, the parallels were undeniable. In 2021, detectives finally approached the Crown Office with their findings. After careful review, prosecutors authorized an arrest. In February 2022, nearly 17 years after Emma Caldwell's death, Ian Packer was taken into custody. For the Caldwell family, the news brought both relief and sorrow. Relief that someone was finally being held accountable, and sorrow that it had taken so long. Margaret Caldwell, who had spent nearly 2 decades fighting for her daughter's case to be reopened, described the moment simply, "We've waited half a lifetime for this." The new investigation also uncovered internal failings within the police force. Reports surfaced that several officers had, in the early days of the inquiry, been aware of Packer's behavior but had chosen not to prioritize it. There were allegations of bias, procedural shortcuts, and poor record-keeping. These revelations prompted official apologies and calls for an independent inquiry into the handling of Emma's case. As Packer awaited trial, the scope of his alleged offenses expanded. Detectives uncovered evidence linking him to dozens of other attacks spanning more than a decade. What began as an investigation into one woman's death had exposed a pattern of predation that had gone unchecked for years. Many of his victims, like Emma, had been women living on the margins, individuals whose voices were too often ignored or dismissed. By 2023, as preparations for trial began, Emma Caldwell's case had become emblematic of something larger: the need for justice systems to listen, to investigate thoroughly, and to protect those most vulnerable. It was no longer just the story of one woman's murder, but a reflection of institutional failure and eventual accountability. Still, amid all the systemic analysis and legal complexity, the heart of the story remained simple: a family's enduring love and persistence. Margaret and William Caldwell attended every briefing, read every report, and continued to speak publicly about Emma, not as a symbol or statistic, but as their daughter. They spoke of her warmth, her laughter, her compassion. They made sure that even as the case became a matter of national debate, people would remember Emma as a person, not just a victim. In late 2023, the Crown confirmed that Packer would stand trial for Emma Caldwell's murder, as well as a long list of related offenses. The announcement marked the culmination of nearly 2 decades of work, grief, and perseverance. For investigators, it was both a professional and moral reckoning. For Emma's family, it was a long-awaited step toward closure. The investigation into Emma Caldwell's death revealed 2 truths: that justice, even when delayed, can still be achieved, and that the pursuit of it often depends not on institutions alone, but on the persistence of those who refuse to let the truth be buried. Her case became a catalyst for reform within Police Scotland, leading to renewed scrutiny of how crimes against women are handled and how vulnerable individuals are protected. In the end, The investigation was not just about solving a crime, it was about correcting years of silence, neglect, and error. It was about restoring a voice that had been lost and ensuring that Emma Caldwell's story would stand as both a warning and a promise. That no matter how long it takes, truth has a way of resurfacing. By the time the trial of Ian Packer began in January 2024, more than 18 years had passed since Emma Caldwell's disappearance and death. For Emma's family, the courtroom was a place of both immense hope and deep anxiety. Would the evidence built over nearly 2 decades be enough? Could a jury now, after so much time, be persuaded of the narrative pieced together by new investigators, forensic scientists, and testimonies from survivors who had spoken out? From the outset, the trial was closely watched by the media, advocacy groups, and members of the public. The case symbolized much more than a single murder. It represented institutional accountability, the voices of marginalized women, and the difficult interplay of memory, evidence, and justice over time. The courtroom, though ordinary in form, judge, jury, gallery, felt weighted with history. The prosecution's case was carefully structured. Its core argument was that Packer had methodically selected and targeted Emma Caldwell, as he had many other women, and that his behavior represented a pattern of predation extending beyond a single incident. The evidence presented included forensic reanalysis of materials recovered from the woods, DNA traces linked to Packer's confirmed samples, patterns of his vehicle movements over the years, and the testimonies of multiple women who had encountered him before and after 2005. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Some were survivors who described disturbing interactions with Packer, late-night rides offered and accepted, conversations that turned uncomfortable, or requests that a woman exit a vehicle in a secluded area. Though none of those encounters ended in murder, their significance lay in their consistency. The repeated behaviors, the methodical approach, the pattern. These testimonies, delivered with courage and composure, painted a fuller portrait of the man the defense tried to portray as a benign figure. Another key group of witnesses comprised forensic experts and cold case investigators. They explained the significance of trace evidence, fibers, soil, and minute DNA fragments, and how, thanks to advances in laboratory methods, materials once considered inconclusive had become meaningful. They walked the jury through the chain of custody of evidence, from the initial collection in 2005 to the modern reanalysis. They discussed how the newer technology ruled out many alternative suspects while strengthening the link to Packer. Though technical, their explanations were delivered in clear language, ensuring the jury could follow both the science and its legal implication. Emma's mother, Margaret, also took the stand. Her testimony was emotionally composed and restrained, yet deeply impactful. She described her relationship with Emma, their conversations about recovery, and the hopes she held for her daughter's future. She also spoke of the years of waiting, the repeated pleas to the police for re-examination, and the sense that justice had been delayed but not denied. Her presence in court was not one of victimization, but of dignified insistence that Emma be heard again. The defense, in contrast, focused on casting doubt, exploring gaps, inconsistencies, and the challenges inherent in revisiting evidence after so much time. They challenged the forensic methodology, suggested alternate interpretations of witness statements, and emphasized that memory degrades with time. They argued that the pattern of alleged prior offenses was circumstantial, not definitive proof of guilt in Emma's case. Cross-examinations probed for discrepancies in statements and motivations of witnesses. It was a tense dance, prosecution trying to tie pieces together, defense seeking to unravel them. A pivotal moment came when the prosecution presented a reconstructed timeline of Packer's movements around early April 2005. Using digital data, vehicle logs, and witness observations, they laid out a sequence that placed him in proximity to both Emma's last known location and the route toward the location where her body was found. This mapping of spatial and temporal movement resonated powerfully in the courtroom. It bridged the distance between the city and the woods, between the known and the unknown. Yet even compelling evidence required human narrative. The jury had to make sense not only of technical testimony, but of motive, intent, and character. Was it enough to demonstrate a pattern of behavior? Could they be convinced beyond reasonable doubt that Packer alone was responsible for Emma's death, rather than someone else entirely? These were not questions of science. They were questions of judgment. As closing arguments commenced, the prosecution reiterated how Emma had been failed by early investigative choices, but that years of vigilance and modern techniques had now given her a second chance for justice. They asked the jury to reconcile the pattern of prior threats, the re-examined evidence, and the consistency of witness accounts. The defense urged caution, reminding jurors that gaps remained, alternative explanations had not been entirely ruled out, and that the passage of time complicated certainty. Beyond the courtroom, the trial prompted reflection across Scotland and beyond. Questions were asked about how early investigative decisions had delayed accountability, how vulnerable women are protected, or not, and how legal systems must continually adapt to the demands of cases that evolve over years. A government commission was launched to review the handling of the case, focusing especially on the earlier years when critical leads were overlooked and evidence mishandled. After deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. On February 28, 2024, Ian Packer was found guilty of Emma Caldwell's murder, and also guilty of multiple related offenses against other women, spanning more than a decade. The verdict was met with relief and sorrow. Relief that a perpetrator had been held accountable. Sorrow that the awaited justice had taken so long. During sentencing, the court imposed a minimum term of 36 years imprisonment before possible release, along with strict post-release restrictions and extended supervision. The sentence was noted in legal circles as one of the harshest in Scottish history for a single individual, reflecting the seriousness of not only the act of violence, but the broader pattern of predation and prolonged suffering.